This podcast is one of the most challenging things that I've ever had to do. My wife and I, we just got done having a very intense conversation and really had a crappy day today based upon a conflict that I had with my wife. And you see, the reason why this podcast is so hard for me is because this is personal. I've run a successful podcast in the architecture space for the past 15 years. There's a part of that podcast that's personal for me, but it doesn't cut as personal as this one does. It's relatively easy for me to jump on to my other podcasts and talk about frameworks for business, talk about frameworks for leadership, frameworks for growing teams, frameworks for marketing, frameworks for collaborating, frameworks for getting more value and giving more value. But on this podcast, I'm charting for me what is really the cutting edge of my own soul growth and expansion. And it deals with really a lot around my relationship. So today we were on our way to church. Got up. I was feeling good in the morning. Daylight savings time right now. And so I got to sleep an extra hour. And as we're driving to church, typically this early in the morning on Sunday, we go to church at you need to be there around 9 a.m. in the morning. And usually we end up staying up late Saturday night. And so Sunday morning is always, let's just put it this way, we're not in the best of moods. My kids are grouchy. They're not trying to make any effort to be cheery. And my wife got up earlier than she was. She was not in the best of moods. She was not cheery, so to speak. And I was just trying, from my own perspective, I was trying to lighten the mood. I was trying to connect. I was trying to kind of elevate my own energy, but also elevate the energy of the family. So I tried to make some conversation on the way to church. And I asked my wife just about some books that she's been reading. I said, hey, what book are you reading right now? Try to engage her in some conversation. And she replied with, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, like, what's the book that you're reading at the moment? And she said, all of them. And I was confused. I'm like, and by the time she said all of them, there was a bit of annoyance in her voice. And I was a bit confused. I was like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean all of them? And she's like, all the ones on the couch. That was it. So, and a conversation, right? But she was definitely annoyed. I could tell there was annoyance in her voice that I had even asked her that question. So now to give you a preview of what I'm going to talk about here, I'm going to talk about a very, very simple and inconsequential conversation that my wife and I had that really hit a very deep and painful wound inside of me, and how this thing then turned into a larger conversation, but only because I was aware of what was happening for me internally. So as she got annoyed with me, typically I've learned my pattern is that when my wife gets annoyed with me or when she expresses any disapproval of what I'm doing, my gates go down hard. In other words, I withdraw. I close down, I shut down, and this is out of protection because it hurts. So in this moment, what ended up happening when she got annoyed with me, it hurt my feelings because from my perspective, I hadn't done anything to hurt her. I hadn't done anything aggressive. I hadn't done anything that I thought would be unkind to her. I was just trying to engage her in some conversation, and my feelings got hurt, right? Sort of like if you're walking down the street and someone smiles at you and says hello, and the person, or maybe you say hello, and the person who sees you kind of scowls at you and gives you a frown, or maybe even worse, they flip you off, right? Now, if you're in a really good resource state and that doesn't trigger any wounds for you, you could just laugh it off and be like, wow, that person's not having a good day. But if you have some wound that's triggered by that thing, then you're going to have reactions. This is what happened to me. So I got hurt, got my feelings hurt by my wife, Carly, and then what I did is I shut down my gates of my heart, meaning that I retreated within myself. I basically said, okay, fine. If you're going to be, in my head I was thinking, if you're going to be upset or grouchy or whatever you are, I'm just going to let you be. And what's really crazy that I'm learning about relationships now is that a truly connected relationship is all about the energy. It's all about the energy. It's all about what we're feeling in our hearts. It's all about what we're feeling behind the scenes. This is something that I never got when I was younger, when I was growing up. I thought that the substance of a relationship was what you saw on the outside, what an impartial observer could see looking, like if there was a hidden camera in the car, that would reveal the relationship. But what I've discovered since then, that I now currently know, is that all that stuff is almost inconsequential. What really matters is the energy that's happening inside of us. And by energy, I mean the emotions we're having, where our heart is, how we're feeling inside, where we're standing in an energetic space. So for me, energetically in that moment, I was withdrawing. I was taking a step back. And I was not in a place of being able to offer empathy to Carly. Now, I recognize that this was happening, and this is where this thing started to snowball, because in the past, I would have ignored it. I would have just rolled on with my day. I would have put on a smile at church. I would have been fine. I would have, for the most part, forgotten about it and just whatever, water under the bridge. It's a small thing. She got annoyed with me, no big deal. But right now, I'm on a personal journey. I'm on a personal mission. I am the hero of my own journey. And part of this journey is integrating, which is the topic we talk about here on this podcast, integrating the lonely, the fragmented parts of my psyche that are not whole. So instead of simply forgetting about this minor annoyance, I decided to dive in. I dove into my psyche. I said, whoa, Enoch, why did you shut down? Like, what happened here? First of all, what might have happened with Carly? But more importantly, why in the world did you start to shut down? Why did the gates start to shut down inside of you? Why did you want to withdraw? And let me give an example of what I mean by withdrawal, right? I've noticed that when someone's grumpy or they're in a bad mood, oftentimes what can make them kind of lighten up their energy a little bit is just joking around with them, having fun, engaging them in conversation, maybe shifting their mind off whatever negative energy they're in and kind of lifting them up to a better place. So there was part of me that wanted to do that with Carly, that wanted to, seeing she was feeling quote unquote grouchy, how can I lighten up the space a little bit? How can I create some positive energy here? Now that's a whole nother conversation about when is it appropriate to try to change someone else's energy, right? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right here in this particular conversation. But when I recognized that I was shutting down, well, let me go back. Here's an example of what shutting down looks like. So when we want to bring some levity to the situation, oftentimes we'll talk. Well, in this situation, after I had already tried to reach out to Carly, and then she basically shot me down by getting annoyed at me, and that was a bad experience because it hurt my feelings, then I was like, well, shoot, I don't want to say anything else to her. Like, I don't want to get hurt again, basically. That's what it came down to. I don't want to make a joke because she might snicker at it. I don't want to try to ask her any more questions. It's just like, whoa, she's not feeling well. I'm going to leave her alone. That is the energy of withdrawal, right? It's like if a little kid, let's put it in the example of a little kid. If a little kid, they're throwing a temper tantrum and we're just like, that's it, I'm not going to talk to you, go to your room. This can lead to feelings of abandonment by kids, because what they end up feeling is that whenever I express emotion, particularly negative emotion, I get shut away, I get abandoned. Now, this goes back to part of my own core wounds, is that that's the way that I was treated as a kid. Whenever I had angry feelings or whenever I was upset, I would be sent to my room. I would be sent like, hey, I'm not going to deal with you until you stop doing that. So that's what withdrawal looks like for me. So I have this pattern of doing that as well. So when Carly is annoyed, like in this instance she was, I withdraw and I'm like, that's it. I'm just going to leave you alone because you're not fit for talking to right now. And you'll probably just say something rude to me and hurt my feelings anyway. So you just do you and I'm going to do me, right? This is disconnection in a relationship. I'm not standing in a place of compassion for her. I'm not standing in a place of empathy for her. I'm just withdrawing and saying, hey, you do you and I'm going to do me. Energetically, that's what's happening. Now, if you had a hidden camera in the car, you would have not seen any of this because it was all the conversation happening in my head. But Carly can feel it and I can feel it. That's why the energetics matter. So as we're sitting there in church, I'm sitting there and I'm trying to I'm processing why in the world I started to shut down when she got annoyed at me. And as I'm doing this, part of me is going into victim mode, being like, this is all Carly's fault. If she just wasn't annoyed at me like that, if she didn't treat me disrespectfully, then I would be happy, basically. Now, I can recognize when I'm going into victim mode and I realize that, oh, hold on, Enoch, You're not actually a victim. So let's set that aside for a minute and let's figure out what actually happened here. As I begin to unpack what was happening for me internally, what I came up with was the following. Number one, I don't like being hurt. I don't like my feelings being hurt, especially by someone who professes to love me. And so when someone that I've let into my heart, who I expect to treat me with respect and who I expect to treat me with compassion, treats me rudely, then my pattern is to shut down again and to withdraw. So I do that out of protection. Now, the second thing that I discovered about myself that came to light here is that there's a part of me that I'll call the stern parent. And this stern parent looks at someone who's behaving immaturely, or someone who may be behaving irrationally, or someone who may be expressing some negative emotions, and the stern parent inside of me sort of turns up his nose and looks down on that person. So there was a bit of this happening within me as well. That as my wife was expressing this annoyance, there was a part of me that was thinking, that's a childish thing to do, that's inappropriate, you're acting very immature, you're a grown woman, why are you acting like this? Now, these were all very, very small, subtle conversations. As a matter of fact, I only discovered them when I took time during sacrament meeting to actually sit down, to write on my phone. I was kind of debriefing. I have a process called stacking that I go through to figure out what's happening internally for me, how does it relate to the situation, and what are the emotions that I'm feeling. So, to make a long story short, Carly, we're sitting down in sacrament meeting, and she reaches her hand over and puts it on my knee. And immediately I have a decision to make. I'm like, okay, I'm still feeling really hurt and I'm really upset about what happened. Not because of the slight annoyance that she caused, but now I'm upset because I've dove into my psyche full force, and now I'm looking at these two demons inside of me, these two unintegrated parts of me. Number one, the part who wants to put down the protection, to put up the walls, to not be hurt. And the second part that is the stern parent who is judgmental and who looks down on other people. And so these are the two kind of unruly parts of my psyche that I'm dealing with. And so now I'm going into a little bit of shame and guilt about the fact that I have these unintegrated parts of my psyche. So as you can see, there's this giant snowball happening as I'm sitting here in my own little world in sacrament meeting. So of course, in Latter-day Saint sacrament meeting, they pass the bread, they pass the water, and I take the sacrament, and that's kind of nice for a little bit, and it kind of allows me to think, but I'm still processing and doing my own quote-unquote repentance process. So when Carly reaches over and she touches her hand on my knee, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm not feeling like I want to hold her hand. I'm not feeling like she's my friend right now. I'm still feeling like she is someone who could potentially hurt me. But then there was another part of my psyche that was like, well, come on, Enoch. I mean, just like settle back into love. See if you can act out of love. See if you can act the way that you want to act. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try. So I reached over and I put my hand on her hand to kind of show her some warmth. But it just felt forced. It felt forced. It felt like I wasn't being true to myself. I wasn't being true to actually the feelings that I was experiencing in that moment, which were feelings of not wanting to connect with her, not wanting to be around her, not wanting to engage with her. So I withdrew my hand. Now, of course, Carly, from her perspective, on her side, she's experiencing her own world. Part of this is she's experiencing me as being cold, me as being rude, me as not communicating with her, and so it's starting to create some unease with her as well. So we go through church, and we come home, and I'm still dealing with trying to process these two unruly aspects of my psyche. Carly lets me know, hey, by the way, I'm ready to talk when you are. And I made some very rude comment. I was like, because I was still angry and I was trying to think about it. I'm like, how could I appreciate the fact that she's reaching out. She says, hey, I'm here to talk. Because she noticed something was wrong. She said, well, it seems like something's wrong. If you want to talk, let's have a chat about it. And I was like, in my head, I thought, woman, if you don't know what's wrong, then that is a problem. Like, if you could just be like, annoyed with me on the way to church and say something that is borderline rude to me and not think anything of it, I'm like, that in and of itself is a problem. So here I am again, going into my own stories about blame and about judgment. So another hour passes. I go on a little rollerblading trip around the neighborhood to work off some energy. And then I come back and I'm like, finally I'm getting to the place where I'm like, okay, I think I have the resources to talk to her without it devolving into angry words and more hurt and more upset. So I go in and, I'm like, hey, Carly, she's in her bedroom working. And I say, hey, I'm available. I would love to talk with you. When are you going to be available to talk? And she's like, I'll tell you what, give me 10 minutes and then we can chat. So I sat on my bed and I read a little book, and then she came over and we chatted. And I'm literally recording this like right off the tails of that conversation. Now, before I go any further, let me make one thing very, 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 very clear. I know there are a lot of people in the world that will judge me and that do judge me because I share information about what happens in my inner world, in my behind closed doors in my life. And the judgmental narrative oftentimes that I hear people say is, why are you airing your dirty laundry? Why are you complaining about your wife? Like this is the way that these kind of conversations are occurring for people. But what I want to hopefully explain and communicate here on this podcast is that is far, far from the intention of this podcast. Okay? I have a core belief that the world would be a much better place if we were all honest and open. Because when we're honest and open, we're not lying. And when we're not lying, then we allow it to expose our hurt to other people. So what I'm doing here is I'm expressing and I'm showing my own disintegrated self. I'm showing you, I'm the podcast listener, or if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm giving you an example of I'm not going to sit up here on the microphone and say, I'm this perfect person. I have it all figured out. This is the path to wholeness. This is the path to atonement. Just do what I do. Follow me. No. What I will do and what I'm committed to doing as I show up here on this podcast is to share with you the way that I apply atonement in my own life. And as part of that, guess what? I show the messed up parts about me. And sometimes I show the messed up parts about my wife. And when I say messed up, what I really mean is human, right? Because we're human beings. We're not perfect. We get annoyed. We get frustrated. So when I share personal stories here on this podcast, this is not about me complaining about anyone. Like, this is about me processing. I've already done my processing. I come on here and I own my victim story, and I share it with you so that hopefully you can resonate with it and you can say, wow, you know what? I get that. I deal with a similar thing like that in my relationship. And maybe you who's listening right now, maybe you have some tools that I don't know about that could help me navigate this in a more powerful way. And if that's the case, I'd love to hear it. And maybe you listening to me talk about this is going to help you feel like you're not so alone. Like, wow, there's another guy out there who's dealing with these things. There's this other man who's committed to his wife, who's in a committed relationship, who struggles with these things and is actually willing to share these things and talk about how he deals with them in his own life and turns these feelings of powerlessness into power, these feelings of disconnection into connection. And that is one of the primary modes of this podcast. When I call it atonement, it's not just about the ritual idea of some esoteric scriptural idea of atonement. It's about what atonement actually means in my own personal life. And I'm committed to bringing to you examples and showing you through my own experience, through my mess-ups and my lies, my cover-ups, and then ultimately being able to come to a place of integration. So with that, here's how this ended. I sat down with my wife. I had a chat with her. And there were tears shed, typically from her, because I'm not a big crier in these kind of scenarios. At a certain point, I did feel like crying because I'm trying to connect with my wife. I'm trying to connect with her. And after that conversation, we were able to find each other again. And the way that we did that, and when I say find each other, I mean I was able to understand where she was sitting at. I was able to understand and I was able to feel and see her love. And she was able to feel and see my love. And we were both able to sit in the place and recognize that we're both human beings. And we're both able to give to each other the grace of understanding that I mess up a lot and she messes up a lot. And guess what? That's just part about being a human being. And she said something that was pretty powerful. She said, She said, Enoch, it seems like you have this definition of a relationship like there shouldn't be any conflict, like a man and a woman should just get along all the time, and I should make you feel good all the time, and I should never say anything that displays any of my weaknesses or any of my humanness. And I said, well, you know what? Like, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I do kind of have that built-in frame that that's what a good relationship is. You know, we look on Instagram and we see these relationship coaches and we think, oh my goodness, they just must have the most amazing relationship. They're like soulmates. They just love each other. You know, they're just like this perfect fit in this puzzle. And then if it's not like that for you, if you're more like in my scenario, you're thinking, damn, what's the matter with me? What's the matter with my relationship? Maybe it's broken. Maybe I'm with the wrong woman. Maybe I'm the wrong man. And none of these thoughts are helpful. So she was spot on that somehow in my past I've been baked into the idea that a great relationship is a relationship in which both partners have a very high level of, shall we say, enlightenment, meaning that they treat each other with respect, they're kind to each other, they acknowledge each other, they build each other up, and that this is the definition of a great relationship. My wife, on the other hand, she said, I have a different perspective of a great relationship. She's like, my perspective of a relationship is after we have a disconnection, how quickly can we return to connection? In other words, how quickly can we return from feeling disconnected to finding that connection again in a powerful way? With both of us being authentic, with both of us not hiding what we're feeling, both of us being raw and real and relevant with the feelings that we're actually having. And as she said that, I was like, okay, that is really smart. And that's what I aspire to. That's the kind of relationship that I aspire to, is having a relationship like that. And that's what happened in this experience. Now, what's discouraging for me as I look at this experience that I had today is like, man, it took me from the morning until right now, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, to kind of find my wife again. So that was, I'm not a mathematician, but what's 9 to 5? 9 to 12, that's what, 3 hours, plus another 5, that's 8 hours. Okay, so 8 hours. So it took me 8 hours to find my wife again. And that's very discouraging when I'm looking at that. Even she's discouraged. She's like, sometimes I just get down and I think that, I lose a little bit of hope about this working for us. And I said, I know. But she reminded me, as the beautiful soul that she is, that years ago, I would have never even communicated the fact that I had gotten my feelings hurt. I was so shut down and I was so emotionally available that I wasn't even available to get my feelings hurt. She couldn't have hurt my feelings because they were not available to be hurt. But along with that inavailability to hurt my feelings was an inavailability to actually connect. Now, as I started to reintegrate my emotional side, as I started to open up myself to my emotions that I've actually had that are real for me, these disconnection periods were long. So I can look back and I can say, you know what? I remember days when it was like 3 days, 4 days of disconnection, 4 days of me stewing and processing and trying to get to a place where I could have a conversation with Carly again where we could reconnect. Even last week, it was Friday night, it was all of Saturday, and it was half of Sunday. That's 2.5 days that I felt disconnected from my wife. And today, it was only 8 hours. So my message to you is, wherever you're at in your journey, it can feel discouraging. It can feel like you're never going to get there. And I saw this with my business. So I saw this with my architecture business. The reason I started the Business of Architecture podcast way back in the day was because I was experiencing financial lack and I didn't know how to turn my skills as an architect into money to provide for my family other than getting a job. And I knew that I was better cut out to be a business owner, let's put it that way. So I noticed the same sort of pattern. As I worked on things in my business, I know it would take longer for me to process upsets, to process rejection, to get over these things. And eventually the window closed down very, very small to where right now in a business environment, I'm ready to blow and go. I mean, I'm running and gunning. There's my capacity, my resilience as a businessman today is light years beyond what it was back in 2012, 2013. So simply that to say that although this may sound like a poor Enoch podcast, that's not the intent at all. As a matter of fact, I am grateful. I'm connected with my wife right now. I'm connected with Carly. We reconnected again, and I am shifting in my head my narrative that a relationship needs to be this perfect relationship where we all get along. Because frankly, I know that that's not the relationship that I would actually want. When I was in the dating world, I went out with a lot of girls. They were all smiles. They were all fluttery eyes. And you know what? None of them, I wasn't attracted to any of them. But I was attracted to Carly because, well, she wasn't all fluttery eyes and smiles. She was a woman who was willing to tell me it like it is. So what I want you to consider today is this. That although your rational mind as a man may think that you want a woman who will never collide with you, a woman who will never express upset, a woman who is docile, a woman who always says yes, a woman who does everything for you and does it your way, what I'd have you consider is that your soul desires and craves a woman who stands in her power. Meaning that she's willing to tell you like it is, whether that applies to her feelings, or whether it applies to the way that you're showing up. Your soul wants a woman who is there to challenge you. Your soul wants a woman who is there to be your mirror. And yet we have this myth that I completely bought into in the Western world of this romance, where the woman is supposed to be batting her eyes all the time, stroking your male ego, and making you feel like a king so you don't have to do your own inner work of actually rising into the king that you actually are. So there's your food for thought today. We have challenged the traditional assumption that a marriage works and that the sign of a great marriage is lack of arguments or lack of collision. I want to turn that particular myth on its head, and I want to put forth a new definition of a powerful relationship. A powerful relationship is where both partners are able to be 100% all of themselves. They are able to be authentic, and through that collision, they're able to find themselves quickly and get back to a place of connection. If you're enjoying this podcast, I'd love to hear what came up for you in this conversation today. If it's been helpful for you, please jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review, leave a rating. I appreciate that. And as always, you can reach out to me and head over to the enochsears.com website where you can sign up for the weekly email where I share more behind the scenes about my growth and my journey as I walk down this road of total integration and atonement. That's all for today. Carpe diem, and goodbye for now. Remember, you are greater than your circumstances, and your wife is your best mirror if you are willing to hear and if you're willing to see.